The Alexander Isak saga has taken yet another turn. There's interest in two potential midfield targets, and Monaco are chasing Kieran Trippier. We're going to be discussing all of that in today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, so let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Apologies for the sound on yesterday's video. I'm hoping it's a little bit better. I've moved the microphone a little bit further away and turned the volume down a little bit. Since I've moved to the new setup, it's difficult to sort of place the microphone and realise how close it needs to be. And over the last couple of days it has felt a little bit distorted, so apologies for that. Hopefully it's better today, but if it's not, I'll work on it again tomorrow. Today I sat down expecting to talk a little bit about Alexander Isak because of some developments and the narrative shift yesterday, and then all of that was kind of blown out the water by a bombshell from David Ornstein saying that Alexander Isak is refusing to play for Newcastle United ever again, regardless of whether he is sold to Liverpool or not. And really, I understand why that's going to create a lot of anger and frustration, but I would urge people to stay calm. Nothing's really changed. It's just probably Isak's agents and Isak's people trying to regain the narrative once again after yesterday. As I said at the top of the show, I was looking at speaking about what felt like a shift yesterday in terms of building bridges, the potential of him signing a new contract, Liverpool not coming back in with the right bid, Keith Downey saying that with every day it feels like this deal's less and less likely, and the reintegration process being at least hinted at ahead of September. And I've always maintained that Isak would, if he stays in September, would then reintegrate and get back into the team and start scoring goals, probably with a new contract that has that written into it with a release clause. And despite today's announcement, I don't see that changing at all. It's one thing to say when you're trying to force a narrative, when you're trying to force the hand of the club. And I think the play that Isak and his team have chosen this summer has really backfired quite spectacularly. Liverpool haven't come to the table with £150 million, which has developed into Newcastle's firm valuation. As I said, going into the summer, it was the minimum that you needed to even have a conversation over it. Now it's become the firm valuation because Isak's made his point and made his position particularly clear on where he wants to play his football next season. But him saying that he will never play for Newcastle again is a way of his agents and him trying to regain, I think, the narrative. And he's backing himself further into the corner that he's put himself into this summer because he's really gone about it the wrong way. I think it's one thing to do that when Liverpool are ready and waiting and there for you, but look at the actions of what Liverpool have done. They've inquired at a lower rate than Newcastle wanted. They've bid even lower than that as an official bid, and in between that they've bought another striker. Yes, they need a striker again, probably since Darwin Núñez left, but they also need centre-backs and they probably need two forwards. Are they in a position really to spend £150 million when they have all of those things to think about? Yes, they can probably afford to spend £150 million on Isak, but they still need to solve quite a few other issues. So he's backed himself into this corner and he's created this problem. And I think today what it does maybe show is it's difficult for the integration process to start quickly. I think maybe it's a reflection on what Eddie Howe was saying about why he can't involve him and why he's not likely to be playing against Aston Villa on Saturday. I think in reality what will happen is that, as I've said for weeks now, come September, if he's still at Newcastle, they'll sit down and the conversation and the dynamic will have shifted. At the moment, Isak is firmly focused on Liverpool and that's all he wants. So he's not looking at Newcastle as an opportunity, he's not looking at Newcastle as an option, he's not looking at being professional because he's basically hedging his bets on getting that move to Liverpool. The trouble is that they're not coming to the table with the right bid. Newcastle don't have their replacements. It's getting to the point where it's becoming impossible, as I've said, since Benjamin Sesko rejected Newcastle, that he goes anywhere. So there's this difficult situation, and Isak can either come forward and build bridges and get himself back into the team, and that was what was discussed yesterday in terms of, he will only come to the table if Liverpool are off the table. I think Liverpool haven't really come to the table in the way that he would need them to, and this idea that Newcastle haven't played ball and this idea that Newcastle are holding him to ransom is really strange to me, because Newcastle have actually done everything that's required of them to facilitate this deal. They didn't want to talk about a deal in any way, shape or form at the start of the summer, and now £150 million has become the valuation. That in itself shows where this has gone, and they've looked for replacements. They nearly got their replacement. They almost bought Benjamin Sesko, and then that would have probably facilitated this move as well. Newcastle have done everything in their power to make this happen on their terms, and it hasn't happened on their terms, so they're not going to let it happen. That's just absolutely fair, and Isak should have a word with his agent. Isak should have a word with Liverpool, because they're the people who haven't made this happen. Liverpool haven't come to the table with the bid that Newcastle United really want, and that's £150 million. Even now, I think in this scenario, it might even be possible, because Isak is being this obtuse about it, that Newcastle, if they're given £150 million, I don't agree with it, but they may well sell him at that price because of what this is causing. Then they'll go and try and buy somebody else, and that's not the ideal scenario. They don't want to be desperate, out of time, and with a lot of money, because other clubs will not play ball, and they will leave themselves short or risk doing that. But given what Isak's doing, if Liverpool come to the table with £150 million, then there's a discussion to be had. But Liverpool are not doing that. With £110 million, and they're not going to give another bid, which still won't be anywhere near £150 million, probably, until Newcastle give them encouragement. But Newcastle have no need to give anybody encouragement, because they've got all the power. They've got 3 years in his contract. They want him to stay, and they want him to score goals for Newcastle. And Isak's last roll of the dice is to say, I'll not play, and to say, you may as well sell me because I'm not coming back, I'm not going to reintegrate. That's a very different conversation to be having at the start of September, when his choice is to not play in the Champions League, to not keep himself in good shape and ready for a World Cup at the end of the year, potentially with Sweden, and also not to, use one of his peak years to waste that. That's a very, very strange approach to take for any professional footballer. I understand what he's trying to do now, but it's a very different conversation in September. And as I say, this is all on Liverpool. Liverpool are the ones who haven't fully played ball here. Newcastle have done everything that they need to do to facilitate this deal on their terms. And it has to be on their terms, because he's a player with a contract with 3 years on it. Everything that's gone wrong here has been the fault of either Liverpool for not matching the bid, or Isak for pushing it on the proviso that Liverpool are an option. Liverpool aren't at the table and ready. That's the thing. I could understand if he did. It's sad. It's sad, and it's really disgusting, I think, what he's done to the fans over the last couple of months, because of you remember the tifo at the West Ham game, his name, Alexander the Great, at war flags, and the parade and everything. Obviously, he's done really well this season. He's scored 27 goals, including in a cup final. He's done everything to be a legend at the club, and he's tarnished that off the back of an idea, or he's risking tarnishing it. I still think, as I said the other day, he can come back and score 30 goals next season, and people will not hold this against him. It will always be an asterisk, though. I think he's absolutely ruined the idea that he's an unconditional legend. This will be something that people will remember him by, regardless of what happens. And that's really sad, off the back of the idea that Liverpool could make the offer, when really they've not done everything to do this. They've not gone all the way out to get him. He's an opportunistic signing from their perspective. They've already signed another striker. They need a centre back. They need another 2 forwards. £150 million is not really conducive with that, and they haven't pushed the boat out to get him. So he's really sort of backed himself into this really disappointing corner, where he's burning all of his bridges at Newcastle by the sounds of it. I still think he can come back. I still think Newcastle would like him to come back, but he's not helping himself. The fact that this is out there is by design from his people, I would imagine, from Isak's camp, trying to push the idea that he doesn't want to play for Newcastle and he wants to play for Liverpool. But there's no leverage. Shows that Newcastle's stance is working, because you saw yesterday that there was talk of reintegration. This is one last Hail Mary to see if they can force the issue, and I would imagine once everything's calmed down at the end of September, if Newcastle haven't got their replacements, and that's looking unlikely, they're not sold on Samu, they haven't moved for Ollie Watkins. Yes, there's Johan Visser that's possibly moving, but that's a Callum Wilson replacement. So the Isak replacement thing is really, really difficult to discuss, because options just aren't there. So as Keith Downey said yesterday, it really feels like with every passing day, this deal gets more and more unlikely. And then once Isak's choice no longer is Liverpool or Newcastle, it's Newcastle or sit and rot, refuse to play, and probably lose a lot of money as well in that scenario. And people have asked, Mark asked this morning on Twitter, why he hasn't put a transfer request in. and it's financial reasons. Basically, you lose out on lots of bonuses, you lose out on basically the club's obligation to treat you fairly. It was a really good clip of Ben Foster talking about this on his podcast, where basically he's explaining that clubs really don't have as much of an obligation to you if you put a transfer request in, you forego your contract. So there's a lot of financial loyalty bonuses and all those sorts of things that you forego if you put a transfer request in. It's very telling that he will not do that. Until he does that, really, Newcastle, the door is still open. I think Newcastle would still like that door to be open. So this isn't dead. I'm not going to be reacting in a way I think a lot of people in the comment section will. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter will. He's burnt bridges, yes, but that's not my job. My job is to give, an honest analysis, calm analysis on the situation. And I would advise people not to be shouting from the rooftops and saying everything. Just remember, the solace here is that Newcastle have the power, and the proof, if anything, that the stance is working. As the threat goes, it would be a very, very strange decision, full of self-sabotage from Isak's perspective. If he were to really give up on his Newcastle career like that, and really is one of his best years, this is an opportunity to play in the Champions League. As I said yesterday, Newcastle are not a championship club. Newcastle are not low in the Premier League going nowhere. With Isak in the team, they can achieve a lot next season. So it would be very, very silly for him, in a World Cup year no less, to make any decisions on that. I understand from his perspective, as I say, what he's trying to do here, which is just trying to force the issue in a very desperate situation that isn't going his way. And I think really the way out of this, if there is any left, is to sack his agent, sign a new contract with a release clause, and agree to go next season. I think that's the last thing that he can do. It's always the thing that is still there. It shows that there is still something of an olive branch, but he is rapidly burning bridges, particularly with the supporters. Lots of reports that he hasn't seen his teammates since he came back. Eddie Howe isn't particularly happy as well. I never thought that he would do this. This is the disappointing thing from my perspective. I thought, yes, I would imagine that he'd want to leave and would consider things. And like I said earlier in the videos, if you go back to the videos before all this broke, what I talked about with Isak is that he would like to go and play for a bigger club and win Champions Leagues and earn more money, and he's absolutely within his rights to do that. But to do this and drag your reputation through and legendary status through the mud, and threaten to do that really off the back of a club that's really helped you progress and a manager that's helped you progress to that level, I think is really, really disappointing. But the important thing is that Newcastle hold all the cards. Liverpool haven't done enough here as well. They haven't bid the money. They've gone and bought another player, and for a saga like this, usually it's a desperation on the other end. Liverpool would be desperate to sign Isak, and in previous sagas, it's not just an opportunistic thing, and when it is, it doesn't tend to happen. It's usually a desperation for the deal to get done on the other side, and Liverpool haven't shown that desperation, and that should be resonating with Isak as well. So my gut feeling is that Isak stays, as I said yesterday, and he scores goals next season, and then leaves at the end of the season with a very tarnished and at least tainted reputation among the fans and with the club. This will be something he's remembered for, unfortunately, even potentially before scoring that goal in the Carabao Cup final, which is still stands. He's still done brilliant things, and he still deserves a lot of credit for his own development, but he should really remember the role that Newcastle United have played in that as well, and they do not deserve this, when actually they've played ball. As I said earlier, they are the ones who've set the price, a fair price, a market price. If you look at Bilal for 112, you look at Caicedo, you look at Samu, as I mentioned yesterday, £80 million. If he's worth 80 million, then Isak is definitely worth 150. He's a guaranteed goal scorer at the highest level. He is, for me, the best striker in the world. £150 million is far from an unfair valuation. And they went and looked for replacements. They've done everything that they can. Newcastle are not to blame here. It's Liverpool and Isak who are the problem, in my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, when we'll move on to talk about other potentially more positive subjects, because Newcastle have been linked with Leicester midfielder Bilal Khannouss yesterday by the Telegraph, and this is a really interesting player, because I think, as I said earlier in the window, I said at the back end of last season that Newcastle needed a number 10, somebody in that midfield area who could do something a little bit different, and he didn't have to be an established name. He could be a young player who can develop and grow into that position, and Khannouss really fits into that. 5 goal contributions in a really poor Leicester team last season that went down with a whimper. He was their best player in my mind, and the underlying stats, which we'll get to in a second, really do reflect well on him. He's got a release clause that expires this week of about £22.5 million, I believe, which means to me that this is a no-brainer. This is a deal that should be done. And as I say, the underlying stats really reflect well on El Khannouss. I mean, defensively, tackles 91st percentile, tackles won 91st percentile, tackles in the middle third 98th percentile, shots blocked 90th percentile, which is a really positive as well. And then look at possession as well. Successful take-ons 98th percentile, and his successful take-on percentage is 98th percentile. So yeah, really good underlying stats. I think he could work really well with Eddie Howe, and for £22.5 million, to me this makes sense. I remember speaking about Martin Baturina earlier in the summer, and he reminds me of that sort of player. And a real opportunity to develop. He can play in midfield as the left 8, replacing Joe Linton. He's a more technical player. And again, if you watch my videos at the end of last season, I was talking about how there's going to be points this season as Newcastle, and in the future generally, as Newcastle move away from being a team full of intensity and that thrives in transition to being more possession-based. El Khannouss is going to be a good replacement for Joe Linton in that sense. So I think that this is the sort of player that Newcastle should be moving for. This is the sort of deal that they should be doing. And I wrote a piece on Malik Thiaw yesterday for Forbes, which I'll link in the description, talking about maybe how Newcastle are returning to a former way of doing things in the transfer window. They've learned from their mistakes earlier in the window where they were trying to go for established plug-in-and-play players, and maybe they're looking for players that they can develop. And El Khannouss really, again, reflecting a look at what they've done in previous years with relegated players like Nick Pope, Harvey Barnes. El Khannouss really fits that mould, and I think this would be a great deal to do very quickly this week. Athletic are also reporting Jacob Ramsey could come in. I think he would be an excellent upgrade on Joe Willock, or option. I think the pair of them would be great with him and El Khannouss, and Willock obviously in there as well when he gets back from injury for maybe this season. But I've said and I've written about Newcastle's need to improve on Willock. I think it's not just a case of replacing numbers. You've got to replace players when they're not performing. And for me, Ramsey would be a good upgrade. He would, as was pointed out in the Athletic, he would help with the homegrown quota as well. Newcastle have already lost one player in Sean Longstaff who would help with that. So if they can gain Jacob Ramsey, I'd be all for that personally. And finally, Kieran Trippier has been linked with Monaco by Sky Sports News by Keith Downey. This is a really interesting one because Kieran Trippier has consistently been linked with an exit over the last couple of years since the Bayern Munich move, and there's been times over those times where it's his importance to the team has fluctuated. At the time he was linked with Bayern Munich, he was incredibly important, but it was £15 million that maybe Newcastle, looking back, maybe they could have taken. Then he's sort of gone out of the team and struggled a little bit, and there's been a sense that he would go. Now he's back into the team again since Lewis Hall's been injured, and absolutely crucial. His leadership's valued. He's been a massively important player for Newcastle. He's been a great servant. He speaks really well. I've spoken to him a few times as well. And I don't think that this is the right sort of move for Newcastle at this stage, with a year to go in his contract. The value he would bring in terms of his leadership and quality on the ball, his quality with set pieces as well, would be more than the monetary value that Monaco would come up with for this deal. I think he'd probably be interested in talking about this deal because it's an opportunity for one last payday, it's an opportunity for one last experience before he retires. But in my opinion, I'd love to see him retire at Newcastle. I think he's been that important to the project. He's been the standard bearer. He was the first player to arrive. He was the leader of this. He's been the leader and in many ways the face of the entire project. And it would be sad to see him go to Monaco in this circumstance. Let me know what you think. As I say, in all of these topics, but particularly Alexander Isak, I'm quite relaxed about it. I think it's posturing. I don't think it'll mean anything in September if he's still at the club. I can't see him now going to Liverpool because I don't see Liverpool getting the money together, and crucially, I don't see Newcastle getting the replacements in. Is that a problem for him? It's certainly more difficult now that this narrative is coming out for him to reintegrate. Is it impossible? Let me know in the comment section. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. Cheers.